This tutorial is for anybody that's already purchased my Environment Prop Master Materials V2. If you haven't, there's a download link in the description. And throughout it, I'm going to be talking mainly about the general layout of the material gem, the global coverage blueprint that controls top layer material amounts and a bunch of other features, and general material instance features and functionality. So let's get started. So I have like all of my main master instances on the left, and you like 99% of the time you're not going to want to touch these. It's basically just, if you're a game company or something and you wanted to change the order of like your channel masks or something like that, and then all of those things would cascade down to all of the children. But I probably wouldn't do that because it is going to break some of the stuff in here if you change it. But it's basically just set up there just in case. But so I have my master prop material instances all on the left, and there's a bunch of them because there's a bunch of different shaders in play. I also have my master children instances on the right, and everything's kind of coordinated with these orange arrows. So they show the parental relationships between the master instances. So the parent starts at the beginning, and then the child ends at the tip of the arrow. So you can see from this, I've basically just made children, master children right here, and then some of the other children are children of the children. It's a bit confusing, but like 90% of the time, it's not even going to matter if you just want to create a little art scene or something. But yeah, in terms of like if you're doing a massive project, then this stuff will actually be quite useful for you in terms of organization. So my master prop material instance here and all of these guys in here, those are basically, they're just for standard meshes. So like ones that you don't need to have material layers on, you already have your textures all ready for them. And, like, let's say you want to have a top layer on one of them, you want to use edge dither, detail, whatever, right? So that's what I would use these for. There's also a tessellation version of some of them. I haven't made nearly as many tessellation versions as I did for the normal ones because, tessellation, you should probably be using it super sparingly. So, yeah, I just wanted to throw a few in there. You guys can make your own. I also have this bump offset, it's kind of experimental. It's just me screwing around. But I mainly just use it for like ice. And, you get this kind of like parallax effect. And yeah, you could use it for a bunch of different stuff. I'm sure you guys will come up with some cool things with it. I also have layer blend materials. So these are pretty much if you want to use like tiled textures with masks to show different materials. So like on this one I have brushed metal on the bottom, then I have painted metal over top of it, and then I have rust over top of both. And then I've combined like a unique normal map and a unique AO over top of everything. So that's, that could be really good for like character meshes or armor or guns, things that you have specific meshes for, or things that you have specific masks where you really just want to get high detail with tiled textures combined with masks and combined with unique normal maps and unique AO per mesh. And there's a 3-layer version and a 2-layer version. I haven't made a 1-layer, but if I get enough requests, I'll make it. I think it's quite easy to just go in there and tweak a couple things in the master material. So I also have a foliage material as well. There's a bunch of different things that you can do with all of these. I'll go over it. But yeah, pretty much anything that you would want subsurface scattering on. And, with foliage, there's a few options in here. You can get like some interaction. So like if your player is walking through grass or something like that, it uses distance field interaction. And I made a quick glass material over here. It has like a bunch of different master instances for different situations. And there's also a prop light, which is just you don't want any features on it. You just want to put some textures in and go. And so I just put that there just in case. So just to go over some of these guys, I'm just going to do a kind of explanation of what each kind of feature is. And just so you guys have an idea of which master instance you're going to want to use when creating these for your props. So most of these kind of reflect the same kind of setup. There's like a grunge version, a Z-up version, a dirt grunge Z-up version. There's some vertical blend where you can blend from the base of your mesh upwards or from the top downwards. And then there's a vertex blend version of each. And for the snow, I did a couple of the detail versions that you could make. Yeah, I would use these sparingly because they can be quite expensive. But to be completely honest, I think most of the shader instructions on almost everything is quite solid. Like everything is green. I think on a couple of them I use on a couple of them, let's say like the world space mapping ones, it goes over like 200 shader instruction, but for the most part they should be between like 125 and 175 shader instructions, and pretty minimal texture sampler counts for each, so it's fairly optimized. The only one that is quite expensive is the glass, because it uses transparency and refraction and a bunch of other things, right? Yeah, so that's just a general kind of overview of what the layout is and where you're going to want to go to find each specific shader. And just to give you guys a bit of context, everything uses this global coverage blueprint. So if I find that in my content browser, it's basically just a child of my main kind of master blueprint. And what this does is it basically just controls all of your top layer information. So like your moss, your rust, your snow, your wetness, your ice, your dirt, and you have a bunch of different settings in here that you can just tweak to get what you want on each. So, or you can override these settings per material instance if you really want to, but I like kind of having more of a macro type approach to the way that I add these materials in, so that all of my materials get wetness or all of my materials get snow, Yeah, for this guy, what you would want to do is it's pretty much set up so that let's say you make a new map, like all you'd have to do is duplicate this guy, and then in your new map just drag the blueprint into the world and then open it, and then all of these settings should automatically just work. So like you can quickly just change, like if you have snow instances on your meshes, like you can just change that, and then it changes everything, right? Now that I've kind of given you this general layout of everything, I'm just gonna go through each kind of feature and how you can use them and how you can tweak them if you need to. And like they all kind of follow this basic pattern of like grunge, then grunge Z up, then Z up, then maybe there's a couple of unique ones like dither or vertical blend, and then all of them have a vertex blend one where you can manually paint your material in wherever you want on your mesh. I'm just going to do it with the snow just because it has most of them in it. And so the snow grunge it's pretty much just a noise map that uses world space. It's used with the blueprint to increase or decrease the amount of snow. And just the base snow grunge, it doesn't use Z up or anything like that. So as you increase the amount of snow on it or anything, it'll do it across your entire mesh. So it won't necessarily come from the top. So this would be good for like let's say you have a floor mesh or something. It's always on the ground. You don't have like walls in your mesh or anything. So it's quite cheap. Yeah, like if you want to tweak the settings in your instance that you create from these guys, then you would just scroll down and like there's a few settings in here that you can change, and they should be in grunge mask. So Z up is just kind of your classic, like the snow is coming from the top, it's used in a bunch of different materials. I use it with my moss, my wetness, and yeah, it's pretty much just your standard snow coverage, and it always comes from the top. It mixes with your normal map, your detail map, everything else, and you can see it adds on the top facing vertex normals and pixel normals of your normal map. And then I also made a grunge version of the Z-Up. So this, I would probably only use this on like massive rocks that, that have like really flat surfaces. I found an issue I had with just using Z-Up all the time is that if you have like a giant rock, sometimes it would just be all snow on the top of it. So I just wanted to make a version so that you could break the snow up with the grunge if you really, really needed to. And like for the Z-Up, if I open up the material, for the Z-Up, basically most of the settings for it are just in this Z-Up slope blending. And you have your standard, like if I want to override the Z-Up blend angle, also, like if I just want to disregard all of my blueprint values in this and just do like some unique blending and have unique values, I can just check this and then it should just override, and then I can change a bunch of numbers inside of my my top layer here. Actually, do you know what? I'll just do it right now just to see. So once I check that, then it's got to do some compiling, but you can see in top layer I have all these new parameters in here now. Like I can change my top layer blending amount. I can, I can change my contrast. There's a few extra options in there, but like for the most part, you probably shouldn't be doing this. I'd probably just use the blueprint values for almost everything. And I also included like an edge dither version of some of the materials in here. It's I actually find edge dither is pretty buggy. It's basically just to blend the edges. You kind of get this like pixelized edge blend right here, and it's usually good for like just blending your rocks into terrain or with other meshes and stuff like that. But if you're going to use this, just make sure that you have distance fields enabled in your project, and on the meshes that you use it on, in this actual static mesh, just search for effect and then turn off effect distance field lighting, because if you turn it on, you kind of get weird, you can get really weird kind of dark spots all over your material where it's kind of colliding, like it's combining the distance fields with other distance fields, and it just gives you weird effects sometimes. So, but beware with this shader. It's actually really, really expensive. Like just enabling edge dither basically adds 100 instructions, so it can get like really, really expensive. And I also have this vertical blend snow Z-Up object based. So you can see here it adds snow on the bottom, but because it's using Z-Up, the snow also comes from the top. So this would be really useful for meshes where, let's say you want to add this into snow on the ground or something, and have like kind of that base of snow where it's crashing through at the bottom. And it's object based, which means that the vertical blend always moves with your mesh. So I'll explain what vertical blend without object based is later, but for now it should be pretty straightforward. And if you want to tweak those settings, you can do it directly inside of the material instance. If I just scroll down, there should be a vertical blend section. So yeah, I can change like my blur amount, which kind of just blurs that line. And if I increase, if I increase the height of it, then I can just add more, add less. But here I'm just going to undo that for now. Let's close these guys. And I also made another version of this vertical blend. So let's say for some reason, like let's say you have a gameplay object that you don't want to have snow on the top of it. but you do want it to be grounded in snow, then I just made a version of that here. And, you know, it's all the same tweakable values that are in the Z-Up version as well. And for vertex blending, like each material has one, like a master instance here. And basically it's all set up so that if you go into your vertex paint, you can pretty much, you have to add black into your material. So most meshes, when you import them into Unreal, they're white in their vertex color. So I just pretty much made it so that if you add black, so your erase color, so if you hold shift, then it'll add in there. So super easy. And I think it actually uses the blue channel. So yeah, if I just click without holding shift, then it erases. If I hold shift, then it adds snow. And there's a few like kind of unique shaders in here that that you guys might be able to use depending on the scene that you're making. So I have this Wetness vertical blend, and it uses global height values. So what that means is in my blueprint over here, let's scroll down to Wetness, I have like a height value. So let's say you have a lake, like a massive lake, and you want to add like some rocks around the edge of it. And wherever the rocks meet the water, they can seem wet. So like I would set the height of my lake in here, and then you know, like let's say my rock is above my water line, then it won't actually get wet anymore. So it's super useful for situations like that, where you would have like a shoreline or something like that that's consistent across the entire world. And you know, in the Wetness, it by default it's kind of set to use like puddles, like deep puddles all over the place. And these pretty much, they have ripples and a bunch of other things in it, but they lower your normal map and flatten it out, and then add the ripples on it. So that's great for some stuff, but like let's say you have a mesh that you know, has a wall on it or is on the side, then it won't ever actually get those puddles on anything but the top surfaces. So it kind of has like a watered down version of the Z-Up that the snow uses to control where the actual puddles go. And in your blueprint, you can change a bunch of settings in here. But yeah, it's pretty straightforward. And for the vertex paint of my Wetness, I made a couple different versions. So you can actually paint the deep puddles like I was talking about before, that remove your normal map and but still show your base color underneath. Or you can just paint a Wetness shader that doesn't have water ripples. It's basically just, you know, a splash of water hit your object, and you can control that wherever you want with vertex paint. So, and I think like all the ice has a couple different things, but they're all kind of just different renditions of the same kind of master instance functionality that I already showed you. One thing I actually forgot to talk about was the detail. So yeah, like detail maps, you would use them to just add kind of surface detail, micro surface detail across your object. So it's great for like massive rocks that you want kind of cracks all over, or you know, just any mesh that needs that extra bit of detail. And I think for most of my materials, for my top layer and my detail, I've actually included in the master material this kind of auto scale for top layer UVs. So what that does is it actually maintains your texel density really cheaply, I might add. It's not world space. It's actually way cheaper than world space, but you can actually see the detail map scaling as you scale your mesh. So it's just this super cheap way of always ensuring that you have decent texel density in your layers. But I never applied that enable auto scale on your base layer. it only actually applies to your top layer or your detail map. So inside of my detail layer, I have a bunch of different options. Like they should be by default set up in these two. Like you pretty much have like an all channels detail where you have roughness, diffuse, AO, and you basically overlay those on your base layer, and they kind of combine them, right? So if I scroll down here, I use like a unique detail channel mask texture for that, and it uses roughness, diffuse, and AO, and just combines them, overlays them. So if you're making unique detail textures in here, just be careful with your values because it uses overlay to combine them. So it means that all of your mid-gray values will not be seen at all, but all of your dark gray values will show up, and all of your light gray values will show up. So inside of the master instance, you can change the detail albedo visibility. You can change it to 0. This, like, without it, that's what it looks like, but with it, that's what it looks like, right? So you have a few options in there. You can change your normal map. You can brighten up your roughness so that it blends better inside of here, like roughness brighten. Just play around with it, see if you can get the settings that you want per the child that you make with this. And I also just made like a normal version. So the normal version, it doesn't use AO, roughness, or albedo detail. It only uses normal. So in here, like, it's kind of just like the other one I just showed you, where you can manually tweak the intensity of your detail normal here. You can also change your UV size or add world space coordinates. There's a bunch of different stuff you can do. And over here, I made some masked materials for you guys. So let's say you have some transparency on your object, or a mask that you need to add. Like, you would just take one of these. It's pretty standard. Like, you have like your two-sided version, your default version, or you can use Vista cards, which kind of come with normal, roughness, AO, all the kind of standard things. And then there's a few emissive options here. Here's your kind of base emissive. If I open up the material, you can see, like, you can add like a colored emissive texture, or what else could you do? Yeah, you can swap the emissive texture here. You can change the emissive color tint, intensity, all that. And there's a couple here that might be useful. Like, I made a random flicker version of it, so it doesn't, like, it's based off the world space of the mesh, so they never actually show the same. Like, even if you have the same instance, it's always kind of offset, so that could be useful. And there's also like an emissive strobe here as well. So yeah, just experiment with those, see what you guys can come up with. I also made a base version of the master prop material here, and that's pretty much just for situations where you don't want to use a top layer. You just want to have all the functionality, the same functionality that you would have in those other materials, except you're not using a top layer. And in here you have like kind of your standard like Vertex paint 2 layer, where you can input 2 unique materials and blend between them with the same way that I showed you guys earlier with the Vertex paint. There's also just world space mapping on a base layer, and then in this one I've done 2 custom materials, like a base and a top layer, and then I put world space mapping on them just as an example to show what it does pretty much. And I made an edge dither version of basically a rock that doesn't have snow or anything on it. So, and then there's a detail version of the base layer which uses pretty much the exact same functionality as that other one. And then there's also a panning material here. So let's say you had like some machinery that, you know, it moves around, or like squid tentacles that move or something, you know, you could add that in here, and it's quite easy. Like if you open up the material for it, like it has this base panner, speed and direction, and you would pretty much just open up those values, and pretty much every parameter in here you can just hover over it and it'll tell you what each one does. So yeah, like R is X, G is Y. So like let's say I wanted it to go vertically instead, just do 0.1, or I could do like negative 0.1, it'll go the other way. Let's just set that back to default for now. And the Tessellation versions of the shader, they're pretty much the exact same versions as all of these ones over here, except they just have Tessellation enabled. So like if I open up that material instance, I can like scroll down, like I basically just checked Tessellation, and it uses a completely different shader though. Just because I wanted to completely disable that, all the cost for all of these shaders, and only have that cost in the Tessellation materials over here. And you know, inside of the Tessellation, you can manually change. Like there's a couple different extra options. Like you can change your the channel that you use for your height mask. You can change your height intensity. But everything else should be pretty much the exact same. So let's close that. And also one more thing is in my blueprint, you'll see that I have this, you know, height intensity in a few of them, like height intensity, and that pretty much just makes it so that if you're using tessellation on your material, then this will be useful. So like I kind of put a little comment in here, like disregard if tessellation is disabled. But let's say my moss, I want to increase the height of it, you know, 5, 1, 1.5, 2. It's pretty basic. And for the bump offset, which just keep in mind, guys, like this it's quite experimental, so there might be a couple bugs with it, and I think it definitely needs work, but I just threw it in there just because, you know, I thought it'd be kind of cool. So this one, it has the option of using subsurface scattering. So like if I load up my buffer channel for subsurface, you can see it actually uses a Fresnel combined with your subsurface scattering. So let's say you have like an object that you know, like you want the edges of your object to actually seem transparent, or not transparent, but like they're kind of see-through and they're absorbing light from behind it, then you would use the subsurface version of that with Fresnel. But I also made a cheaper version that doesn't use subsurface on it, but still contains all of the bump offset options. So if I just open that up, then you'll see, if I just scroll down, there's like this whole section, bump offset. Like you can control how visible your albedo underneath is. Yeah, you have a mask texture, which I think I was just using my AO. It's a pretty basic texture, but I just used a mask from my ice to make those layers underneath visible. And you can choose which channel you want, because there's actually 2 layers of the bump offset that happen, but they're basically just using the same channel for both. And you know, you can fiddle with the UV size, or you can change how deep it looks. -1. Put that back. Like there's a few settings in here, but I'm just gonna set that back to default for now. And inside of my layer blend materials, which I already described them as being, you know, pretty much just materials that you want to use masks with to control where tiled layers go. So if I open this up, this is the 3-layer example material here. So you can see like in here, you have like a base layer, then you have a mid layer, then you have a mid layer O2. And they kind of just go in order. So like the base would be the very bottom, the middle layer would be on top of the base, and then the mid layer O2 would be on top of mid layer O1. And you know, you can just put your tile textures in here and, you know, standard setup. Except I actually use this option in the material to use a mid layer channel mask texture for albedo, and then I tint the albedo. So that basically just removes a texture, because I don't need a diffuse texture here, and I can just tint it, tint one of my channel masks here, which is the blue channel in this case. Yeah, so it's pretty powerful. Like, and then you can change the UV size. You can add that auto scale stuff that I showed you before. That can be quite cheap. But keep in mind, guys, like these, like if you're using a 3-layer material, it's, you know, it starts to get a little bit more expensive. This one's using like 182. That's to be honest, that's not even that bad. It's more the concern with these are the amount of textures that you're loading. So just be careful that, you know, with these, because of that auto scale, like you could probably lower the resolution of your textures so that they're quite small. But yeah, it's basically just fetching 2, 4, 6, 8 textures for this one 3-layer material. So just as long as you're like reusing these textures on everything, then I don't think it's that much of a problem. But this is kind of like one of the only ways that you can get like a good character that has really, really nice tile detail up close. And then on top of all of those tile textures, I have a layer mask. So here I just used one of my example textures, but it's basically just a channel mask texture that contains a bunch of different masks for the different materials. So yeah, I masked what is this one? I think I masked the painted metal on this one, and then I masked the rust on this one. And the base layer doesn't actually need a mask, because it's basically just on the bottom, and then the masks get put over top of it. But once you have that set out, you can choose which channels you want to use for which mask. And then in this version, I actually use an AO in my blue channel, because I'm actually only using 2 masks, and I put that as my blue channel in there. And then you can combine it with like an overall normal map that comes in over top. And you know, these guys on the right, they're pretty much the exact same thing as this guy, except I've pretty much just linked them with the top layer. So if I open up my blueprint, I can, you know, if I change the amount of snow, then it'll add it or minus it on them, or wetness over here. It's the same thing. And then, you know, you have a 2-layer version. It's the same thing, except mid-layer O2 is disabled. And for my foliage master material, let's crack that open. So it's kind of just your standard foliage material. Like you have wind settings, you have like an opacity distance fade, which you can use to fade it out in the distance. You have an interactive foliage setting in here, which is this guy right here. You know, it pretty much just uses a really cheap distance field method to push your mesh a little bit as your character walks through it. And I also have a Z up as well, and I specifically limited it to the snow. So here, if I grab this, that's open. And if I scroll down, yeah, you can just check use as snow, and then as you increase the amount of snow, it'll actually like add it on your meshes. It's basically the same one that I used in my landscape material. Okay, so yeah, I also included this vertical blend option with the Z up here. So, you know, one of the problems I noticed with my foliage in my landscape is that it didn't actually get snow in the bottom of it. Like even if I added snow in the, like even like with this guy, this is basically the old one I had, where you get snow on it, but it doesn't, like, you don't get that grounding at the base. So I pretty much just corrected that here, and yeah, as you add it, it just adds it in there. So, and I think it also changes your subsurface scattering as well. So here, let's open that. Yeah, so like you could change your top layer subsurface scattering to be whatever you want, right? So like if it's snow, I'd probably maybe like add like a touch of blue and then have it, maybe something like that. So now it'll actually kind of get illuminated as the light passes through it. And in all of the foliage materials, you kind of have your standard base layer. I think there's a couple extra options. You can have like you can change your specular value. You can also add like a subsurface scattering texture, tint it, change the intensity. But yeah, it's pretty standard. And then over here in the foliage interaction instance, I'm just gonna open that. If I scroll down, you kind of have all these different settings. So I just play around with them. Like say like 5,000. If I move this around, then the foliage will actually it'll offset a lot more. I actually found like for most stuff, like the default settings should work pretty good. Like it's not like an overwhelming huge, it's just a fake quick thing that I added in there. It's like there's probably way better ones on the marketplace, but like for this, it's pretty, like, it's cheap. Like this is like 148 instructions with the interactive foliage. So yeah, like having bones and stuff like that, it can get super crazy expensive really fast. So I would probably just stick with this for now. And it might be a little bit buggy depending on the way that your mesh is made. But yeah, you'll probably just have to play around with the settings to make it work properly. And onto the glass material. So this, it uses transparency and refraction. So like I think like overall most of the settings should be pretty standard. Like you can add a normal map in it. I have like kind of a frosted glass version that uses kind of a normal map and breaks up the refraction and the translucency. There's also, you can add a mask onto it to control where the transparency actually, or the translucency actually happens. But if you have multiple layers of it overlapping, you might get weird results sometimes. But yeah, I just quickly threw this in there just so you guys have like kind of a whole smorgasbord of stuff to be able to work on your project with. I thought I'd just give you guys a quick rundown on how the shader works, and how you can understand just what all the base features are inside of it and how to interact with them. So like pretty much everything starts with your base layer. That's like your bottom layer. It has a bunch of features in it, and then you have your top layer, which goes on top of your base layer. And then you have your top layer material types, and in here these kind of coordinate with your blueprint. So you can pretty much just say like in here, if I have nothing checked, then I basically just have a custom top layer, and I could input custom textures and do a bunch of stuff in here. But like, let's say if I want to let's say I want to change this so that it's not using snow, it's using rust instead. All I have to do is check rust, and then it basically just grabs it from the master shader, and all the textures are like already set up in it. So in my blueprint, like it's all of those values get changed pretty much by the blueprint. for these top layer material types. But if I want to override them, all I have to do is go into my top layer material types, type disregard blueprint values, pull that up. As soon as I do that, I get all these extra options in here. I can play around with the amount, have more, have less. And if I want to change my Z-up, anything to do with my Z-up, scroll down here, change my Z-up angle. I can add more contrast to it. Yeah, there's a ton of different ways that you can use this. I thought it'd be good to give you guys just a rundown on kind of the base features of it. So for now, I'm just going to disable that rust. I don't want to use, I don't want to use any of these right now. And I'm actually just going to turn off Z up because I just want to show you guys some of the base stuff in here. So like I explained earlier, your channel mask, it's incredibly important. So it's pretty much just set up. So roughness, height, AO. But like let's say I want to use metal on this, on any of the base kind of prop master material instances over here. Or like let's say I duplicate one or create a child from one and I want to add metal on it. Like by default, I think it's turned off for most of them except for ones that obviously will use metal, say like dirt or rust, or like emissive, it's on by default. But I was trying to optimize everything, so I turned it off unless I like absolutely need it. And so if you want to use metal, you just click here, click OK. And then as soon as I do that, I get this extra channel right here. And because I've basically run out of channels, because I'm using RGB in my channel mask texture, I pretty much just use the alpha channel for my metalness, and which is actually going to mean that by default, if you don't have an alpha channel, then it's going to be white, because your alpha channel basically just becomes white when you don't have one, if you have a channel that's referencing it in here. So I've created a couple things that you guys can do to fix that. So you could actually take your channel mask texture and then add your metallic mask in your alpha right here. Or you could go in here and you could say use unique metal number value for base material. So what this does is it makes your whole base layer either become metal or not. So if I check it, then it gets rid of that channel mask there. And then I get this base metal amount, 1 metal, 0 not metallic. So I could change that to 0, or I could make it full metal. So super easy. Just be aware of that, guys, because I know it's a bit of a pain in the ass having the alpha mask and the channel mask, or having the metallic mask in the channel mask texture, but I literally just ran out of channels because I really need the height mask for blending with the Z up and with a bunch of other things. So it's imperative that I have that height mask in there. And you could like disable AO on your base layer, like, and then you'll get an extra channel. If I turn that off, it just removes it. Or if you're using like distance field AO in a dynamically lit scene and you don't actually need AO, you can just disable it in your material completely, and then you'll have an extra channel here, and your shader will actually just be a little bit more optimized. You could also use base layer channel mask texture for albedo. So let's say you have a base layer that's a single color. Let's say snow is white, right? You could click this, and then your albedo texture disappears, and now you get this base channel for albedo here. You could change that to one of the channels in your channel mask. So let's say you had like a grayscale diffuse texture that you wanted to add in your channel mask. You could add it in there, and then you could color tint it to whatever you want. And here you have like kind of your base UV setup. So like you can do disproportionate UVs. You could do like 0.5, and 1. So let's say you had like 512 by 1024 texture, you can change them there. Also, if you want to change the channel, the UV channel that your base layer is using, you can do it here. So you can have 0, by default it's set to 0, but if you wanted your base layer to actually be referencing the UV channel 1, you would check this. And I already kind of, or I think I go over this auto scale later, but it's basically just a good way of, a really cheap way of scaling your UVs on your texture if you scale your mesh. So can be really useful. Plus, like, you have this use world space coordinates on base layer, and that the use world space coordinates is on every layer as well. So you guys can just kind of customize everything the way that you want, or you can use my instances. So in the top layer material types area, I have this affected by wetness slider, or parameter switch. So if, let's say, you're making a material that isn't part of the wetness group, and like, let's say you have like rust or like snow or something like that, or, you know, even like a base layer that has no top layer material on it, then if you check that, then as you increase the wetness amount, your material will still actually get wet, and it's actually super cheap. So like, if I go into my thing, let's say I lower this value. So now it's, you know, if you don't want puddles on it, but you still want the wetness slider to actually interact with it, you can use it like that. And like, it's actually super cheap. Like, if I go into my roughness, it's basically just multiplying black over top of your roughness channel. So like, if it's at 0, it's set to, you know, your base roughness, but as it gets higher and higher, then it gets darker and darker and wetter, right? Just gonna uncheck that. And, you know, by default, your top layer isn't going to be enabled unless either you have a grunge mask enabled or Z up enabled. So if you check that, then you get all these extra settings up here, right? Yeah, so if I have nothing selected in my top layer material types, then it's basically just custom here. So I can make whatever material I want on my top layer. Like right now, it's set to snow by default. So like, you'll get some snow on there, but you could just change this if you wanted it to be like oil or like ooze, like whatever you want it to do. And it's all the same setup as the base layer, so you can get the same functionality out of it. Except I think there's a couple extra ones, like you can view your base layer underneath. Like, that's kind of, you know, if you wanted like water or like ice or something where like you can see through, it kind of fakes like a transparent material on top. So here, let's check that just so you guys can see. And as soon as I check it, I get this top layer visibility, and you know, I can change this. Let's say it's like 0.1, 0.2, and that's pretty much the exact way that I do my ice material. Because I'm not actually like checked on any of these top layer material types, then that means that I get all these extra options for blending my top layer in, if I'm using Z up especially. Plus you get the Z up options down here. And, you know, at the very bottom, that's pretty much where I set all of my options. So, you know, you can enable detail channel mask, albedo, normal, edge dither, grunge mask. You can add opacity. You can have your panning texture. You can change your top layer height mask so that when you blend your Z up in, it's your mask that it uses to blend in, which is basically your height map here. It's inverted. What else do I got? Yeah, you could turn on moss shading. It's just it kind of just creates this Fresnel effect on the moss, which makes it look like it almost kind of absorbs light in its own way. And if you really are missing an albedo texture in your base layer, you can check this, and then your roughness channel will disappear, and then you'll have a couple extra options for your albedo roughness. So it's basically just desaturating your albedo roughness or your albedo texture, and then adding a power node to it. And, you know, there's a few options in here. I'm not going to explain everything. Like, just play around with it and see what they do. To be honest, I think, like, almost everything else I explain in the rest of the video. So, enjoy. Okay, so I'm just going to show you guys how you can just get up and go. Like, if you've imported your prop, you already have your texture set up. You know, your channel mask is set up in the right order. Like, for most of my shaders, I think... The typical order for your channel mask is roughness, height, AO. So roughness in red, the height in green, and the AO in your blue. So I'm just going to create a couple shaders really quick and just show you guys how you can just super quickly make with whatever you want. So like, let's say I want to make a moss version of this rock. So I'm just going to go through, look, what do I want? I think I'm just going to do a standard kind of Z up. So I'm just going to find that master instance right here, and I'm going to create a material instance from it. And then I'm just going to move that master instance into my prop folder here. And I'm just going to rename it so that it's super easy to tell what it is. You know, once you have like 50 shaders in here, it's gets really annoying. So just be wary of having the correct name on your materials. So M for material, mountain, rock, underscore 18. And then, you know, I have like all the extra kind of features inside of it. You know, you can tell what it is just by the name. So moss Z up, and I'm just gonna drag that on my rock over here, and you can see it has the default rock. It has the default rock textures that come with the moss, but we want to swap those for our unique textures that that Epic has already made. I think this rock is from the kite demo. So I'm just going to open up that material, and I'm just going to swap the textures in it. So, boom. Now I have a brand new version of my moss material right here, which is super handy. But let's say I want to make a snow version of it too. So I'm just going to duplicate that. And here I'm just going to change moss to snow just so that my naming works. And I'm going to put that material on there. And I'm just going to open this up and go find the snow master instance that I want to use. So let's say I want to try this snow grunge with Z-Up. Let's say I have like a really big version of my rock. Let's just scale it up so you guys can see. And actually, do you know what? If it's really big, maybe I should try my detail. So I'm just gonna find that material instance, like basically just select it in the content browser. And then in my snow version of my new instance that I've created for this rock right here, all I got to do is just switch my master instance for it. So now you can see it's using snow Z-Up detail. And because I've already like overridden my textures here, it keeps those overridden settings, but just changes all the other ones according to the master instance that's here. So you can see it's pretty powerful, like right away. And do you know what? Let's make another version. And what else could I do? let's do like a wetness vertex blend. So let's say I want to paint some wetness on my rock. So I'm just going to find that master instance right here. Actually, wait. Sorry. I'm going to go back and duplicate this. And actually, I'm just going to check the naming convention on this just to make sure it works. So master inst wet vertex paint. So if I grab this, oops, and rename it, let's get rid of this one. I don't like that. And it's not using Z up, and it's not snow. So I'm going to say wet underscore vertex paint. And I'm just going to drag that material onto here. And it's still using the snow master instance. So we got to fix that. So I'm just going to open up that material and close my old one. And now that I have that open, I'm going to find my master instance. And I'm just going to go in here, scroll down to the bottom, change the parent. And as soon as I do that, it doesn't look like much, right? But as soon as I go into my vertex paint, let's say I have a lower intensity so it's not so intense, and hold shift, boom, now I have wetness on this material. So it's super easy to use. And for all of my master materials, or sorry, all of my children materials that I've just created for these rocks, because I've made instances from them that are from these, they'll all work automatically with my global coverage blueprint. So if I open that one, it's the example map version, and let's say I want to change my snow across my whole world, I wouldn't want to do it on a per asset basis. You can if you override some settings in the child material, but you know, I'd rather control everything at once. So yeah, you can just go in here and change that, right? But like you can see the power of like just duplicating your material instances and then just changing the parent instance in them, and then you basically have like, you know, 50 different shaders that you can potentially use that all have different features inside of them. And you know, they're all organized, they're all named properly, they're all kind of in their correct folders. It's way easier to manage, and I specifically designed it that way. So if you guys enjoyed the tutorial and product, be sure to leave a like and a comment, and also don't forget to subscribe. Thanks.